The morning sun cast long shadows across the civilian airfield as Rebecca Martinez adjusted her headset and ran through her pre-flight checklist. At 30 years old, she had traded the adrenaline-fueled chaos of military combat for the peaceful monotony of cargo runs. Her long chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her piercing blue eyes scanned the instruments with the same precision that had once made her a legend in the elite Raven Squadron. Most people at Henderson Logistics knew her simply as Becca, the reliable pilot who could deliver anything, anywhere, on time. They saw a quiet woman who kept to herself, spoke only when necessary, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to navigate through the worst weather conditions. What they didn't know was that Rebecca Martinez had once been Captain Rebecca Martinez, call sign Valkyrie, one of the most decorated Apache helicopter pilots in military history. The transition from military to civilian life hadn't been easy. After a decade of flying into hostile territory, dodging enemy fire, and executing impossible rescue missions, hauling medical supplies and equipment across peaceful skies felt almost surreal. But it was the peace she had craved after losing too many friends, after watching too many good soldiers come home in flag-draped coffins. Her phone buzzed as she completed her equipment check. A text from her supervisor, Dale Henderson, the company owner's son, who had recently taken over daily operations. Martinez, need you to take the evening run to Denver. Johnson called in sick again. Rebecca frowned. That was the fourth time this month that Marcus Johnson had mysteriously fallen ill on a Friday evening. She suspected he was using his seniority to avoid the less desirable runs, leaving the newer pilots to handle the weekend cargo deliveries. But Rebecca didn't mind. Flying was flying, and she'd rather be in the air than dealing with office politics. As she walked toward the company trailer that served as their operations center, she noticed Dale Henderson standing outside, talking animatedly on his phone. At 28, Dale had inherited his father's business, but none of his work ethic or respect for employees. Since taking over 6 months ago, he'd implemented a series of new policies that seemed designed more to assert his authority than improve efficiency. I don't care what the weather report says, Dale was saying loudly into his phone. If Martinez can fly through a hurricane, she can handle a little turbulence. These pilots are getting soft. Rebecca paused, feeling a familiar knot form in her stomach. She'd heard variations of this conversation before. Dale had somehow learned about her military background and had started treating her differently than the other pilots. Not with respect, as she might have expected, but with a kind of casual disregard that suggested he viewed her past service as making her invulnerable to normal human concerns. She pushed through the door of the operations center, where several other pilots were gathered around the coffee machine. The conversation died as she entered, and she caught the tail end of what sounded like complaints about the new overtime policy. "Morning, Rebecca," called out Tom Bradley, a former Air Force transport pilot who'd become her closest friend at the company. "Heard you got stuck with the Denver run again." "It's fine," Rebecca replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Better than sitting around here." "That's not the point," said Linda Walsh, a helicopter pilot who joined the company around the same time as Rebecca. "Johnson's been pulling this same routine for months, and Dale just lets him get away with it because his uncle is some big shot at the main office." Rebecca shrugged, unwilling to get drawn into workplace drama. In the military, you followed orders and didn't complain. But she was beginning to realize that the civilian world operated by different rules, and not all of them were fair. Dale burst through the door, his phone still pressed to his ear. "Yeah, Martinez is here. She'll take whatever we throw at her. Former military, you know how they are." He glanced at Rebecca with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Tough as nails and twice as stubborn. Something in his tone made Rebecca's jaw tighten, but she remained silent. She'd learned long ago that responding to casual disrespect often made things worse. Instead, she focused on her coffee and tried to ignore the uncomfortable glances from her colleagues. "Martinez," Dale called out after ending his call. "Need to talk to you about your flight schedule." Rebecca followed him into the small office that had once belonged to his father, where the elder Henderson had kept photos of aircraft and company milestones. Dale had hung framed certificates from a business degree and motivational posters about success and leadership. "Sit down," Dale said, settling behind the desk with an air of importance that seemed forced. "I've been reviewing performance metrics, and I've got some concerns about your approach to company policy." "What kind of concerns?" Rebecca asked, maintaining her calm demeanor even as warning bells began ringing in her head. "Well, for starters, you're flying routes that other pilots have refused. That's creating unrealistic expectations for the rest of the team." Dale leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I need you to understand that just because you used to be some hotshot military pilot doesn't mean you can make the rest of us look bad." Rebecca felt her temper flare, but kept her voice steady. "I'm just doing my job, Dale. If other pilots don't want certain routes, that's between you and them." "It's Mr. Henderson in the office," Dale corrected sharply. "And I'm trying to maintain team cohesion here. Maybe you need to dial back the hero complex and remember that you're just another employee now." The words hit harder than Rebecca had expected. She'd spent years being praised for her dedication and skill, for her willingness to take on impossible missions and bring everyone home safely. Now that same commitment was being twisted into a character flaw. "I understand," she said, quietly, though she didn't understand at all. "Good. Now, about your schedule. I'm putting you on permanent weekend duty. Someone with your ... stamina should be able to handle the extra hours without any issues." Rebecca realized this wasn't a request or even a normal scheduling assignment. This was punishment for being too competent, too reliable. Dale was using her military background as an excuse to dump the least desirable shifts on her, knowing she wouldn't complain as she left the office. Tom was waiting by the coffee machine, concern evident on his weathered face. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a scheduling change," Rebecca replied. But something in her expression must have conveyed more than her words. Tom lowered his voice. "Dale's been gunning for you ever since he found out about your service record. I've seen it before with guys like him. They feel threatened by people who've actually accomplished something." Rebecca wanted to brush off his concern, but deep down, she knew he was right. This wasn't about scheduling or company efficiency. This was about power, about a young man with authority issues trying to cut down someone he perceived as a threat. As she walked back to her aircraft, Rebecca caught sight of her reflection in the hangar windows. The woman staring back at her looked tired, older than her 30 years. She'd thought leaving the military would mean leaving conflict behind, but she was beginning to realize that some battles followed you wherever you went. The afternoon flight to Denver was routine, but during the return journey, Rebecca found her mind wandering to her old squadron. She wondered what Captain Michael Torres would think of her situation. Torres had been her commanding officer in the Raven Squadron, a fair man who judged people by their actions rather than their connections or politics. Her radio crackled to life, pulling her from her thoughts. "Henderson Logistics 77 Alpha. This is Denver Control. Be advised of severe weather moving into your area. Recommend immediate diversion to Colorado Springs." Rebecca checked her instruments and scanned the horizon. She could see the storm building, dark clouds rolling across the landscape like an advancing army. Any other pilot would have immediately requested the diversion, but Rebecca had flown through worse conditions than this. Much worse. "Denver Control, Henderson 77 Alpha. I can handle the weather. Requesting clearance to continue to home." Base. There was a pause before the controller responded. 7-7 Alpha, are you certain? This is going to be a rough ride. Roger that, Control. I've got it. As she flew into the heart of the storm, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The familiar calm that came with facing real danger. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, and turbulence shook the aircraft, but her hands remained steady on the controls. This was what she was built for, what she'd trained for. But even as she successfully navigated through the storm and landed safely back at Henderson Logistics, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that bigger storms were coming. Dale Henderson was just getting started, and she had a growing suspicion that her military background wasn't going to be the shield she'd hoped it would be. It might actually make her an even bigger target. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill, and Rebecca found herself arriving at the airfield earlier than usual. She'd spent the weekend thinking about Dale's new scheduling assignment and had decided to approach the situation professionally. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe they could work something out. Those hopes were dashed the moment she walked into the operations center and saw the new duty roster posted on the bulletin board. Not only was she scheduled for every weekend for the next 2 months, but Dale had also assigned her to the most challenging routes during the worst weather windows. Brutal schedule, Tom observed, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Looks like you're flying the mountain passes during storm season and the oil RIG runs during the high wind advisories. Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. Someone has to do it. No, Rebecca, someone doesn't have to do it. These are all runs that normally get split between 3 or 4 pilots. Dale's setting you up for failure. Before Rebecca could respond, Linda Walsh joined them, shaking her head as she studied the roster. This is ridiculous. Half of these routes violate our own safety protocols. The insurance company specifically said no single pilot should fly more than 6 challenging routes per month. How many did he give me? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 14, Linda replied grimly. And that's just in the first month. The operations center door slammed open, and Dale Henderson strode in with his characteristic swagger. He was wearing a new leather jacket and expensive sunglasses despite the overcast sky, clearly enjoying his role as the boss's son. Morning. Team, he announced loudly. Hope everyone's seen the new assignments. I've restructured our operations to maximize efficiency and ensure our most capable pilots are handling our most demanding routes. Rebecca noticed how his eyes lingered on her when he said, most capable, and the way he smirked suggested this wasn't the compliment it appeared to be. Mr. Henderson, Rebecca said, stepping forward. I'd like to discuss my schedule when you have a moment. Nothing to discuss, Martinez. You're the one who keeps telling everyone how easy these runs are for someone with your background. I'm just giving you the opportunity to prove it. The other pilot shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca realized that Dale was deliberately having this conversation in front of everyone, making it impossible for her to negotiate without looking like she was backing down from a challenge. I never said the runs were easy, Rebecca replied carefully. I said I can handle them safely. There's a difference. Is there? Dale's smile turned cold. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to have it both ways. Either you're the superhuman pilot everyone says you are, or you're just another employee who needs to follow company policy like everyone else. Rebecca felt the trap closing around her. If she accepted the schedule without complaint, she'd be endorsing Dale's unrealistic expectations. If she pushed back, he'd use it as evidence that she'd been overselling her abilities. The schedule as written violates several FIA regulations regarding pilot fatigue and safety margins, she said quietly. I'm not refusing the assignments, but I think we need to review them for compliance issues. Dale's face darkened. Are you questioning my competence, Martinez? I'm questioning the schedule, not you personally. Same thing. I designed that schedule based on careful analysis of pilot capabilities and company needs. If you can't handle it, maybe you're not the right fit for this company." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a crash fire. Rebecca realized that Dale wasn't interested in operational efficiency or safety compliance. This was personal, and he was using his position to wage a campaign of harassment disguised as management decisions. "I can handle the schedule," Rebecca said, knowing she had no choice. "I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the regulatory concerns. The only thing I'm concerned about is getting our cargo delivered on time. If you're worried about regulations, maybe you should spend less time second-guessing management and more time focusing on your flying." As Dale stalked back to his office, the other pilots gathered around Rebecca with expressions of sympathy and anger. "This is harassment," Linda said bluntly. "You should file a complaint with his father." "Old man Henderson's been in the hospital for weeks with heart problems," Tom replied. "Dale's basically running everything now, and he knows it." Rebecca studied the schedule again, mentally calculating flight times, weather patterns, and maintenance requirements. It was ambitious to the point of being reckless, but it wasn't technically impossible. She'd flown more challenging missions during her military service, though never as a sustained campaign over months. "I can do this," she said, more to convince herself than the others. "That's not the point," Tom insisted. "The point is that he's singling you out for treatment that no other pilot would accept. He's using your military background as an excuse to pile on unreasonable demands." Throughout the morning, Rebecca threw herself into flight preparations with characteristic thoroughness. She studied weather patterns, reviewed maintenance logs, and plotted optimal routes for each assignment. If Dale wanted to test her capabilities, she'd show him exactly what a former Raven Squadron pilot could accomplish. Her first flight of the day was a medical supply, run to a remote mining facility in the Colorado Rockies. The weather was marginal, with low clouds and gusty crosswinds that would challenge any pilot. As Rebecca approached the landing zone, she could see Dale watching from the operations center window. The landing was technically perfect, executed with the kind of precision that came from years of setting down in hostile territory under fire. But as she shut down the engines and began unloading cargo, Rebecca realized that her success might actually be making things worse. When she returned to base, Dale was waiting on the tarmac with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he wasn't pleased with her performance. "Martinez, I need to talk to you about your fuel consumption report." Rebecca handed him the completed forms. "Everything's within normal parameters, Mr. Henderson." "Normal for who?" "Your fuel usage was 8% higher than the projected estimate, because I had to fly around weather that wasn't in the forecast when the estimate was calculated," Rebecca explained patiently. "The deviation was necessary for safety and was well within acceptable margins." "Acceptable according to who? We're running a business here, not a government operation with unlimited budgets. I need pilots who can meet projections, not exceed them every time they feel like taking a scenic route." Rebecca felt her professional composure beginning to crack. "I followed established safety protocols and delivered the cargo on time, despite challenging conditions. The fuel variance was minimal and justified. That's your opinion. My opinion is that you're getting comfortable making decisions that cost this company money. Maybe too comfortable." As Dale walked away, Rebecca noticed several mechanics and ground crew members had witnessed the exchange. She could see the sympathy in their eyes, but also something else: the recognition that Dale Henderson was systematically targeting her, and that anyone who supported her too openly might become his next target. The rest of the day followed a similar pattern. Every flight Rebecca completed successfully seemed to generate a new complaint from Dale. Her radio procedures were too formal. Her maintenance requests were too detailed. Her flight reports were too thorough. Each criticism was technically baseless but delivered in front of other employees, creating a constant atmosphere of professional harassment. By evening, Rebecca felt emotionally drained in a way that combat missions had never affected her. In the military, challenges came from external enemies and environmental hazards. Here, the threat came from within, from someone who was supposed to be on her team. As she prepared to leave for the day, Tom approached her with a concerned expression. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about what's happening here, and I think you should document everything. Write down every conversation, every unreasonable demand, every time he criticizes you in public. You're going to need evidence if this escalates." "You think it's going to escalate?" Tom's expression was grim. Guys like Dale don't stop when they find a target. They keep pushing until something breaks. The question is whether it's going to be you or him. That night, Rebecca sat in her small apartment reviewing the day's events and trying to understand Dale's motivation. She'd encountered difficult commanders during her military service, but they'd usually been driven by mission requirements or legitimate performance concerns. Dale's behavior seemed rooted in something more personal and petty. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard you're having issues at work. Some battles are worth fighting. Others aren't. Choose wisely. A friend." The message disappeared from her phone a moment later, leaving Rebecca staring at a blank screen and wondering if she'd imagined it. But something about the timing and the phrasing suggested that someone was watching her situation more closely than she'd realized. Someone who might understand the kind of war Dale Henderson was trying to wage against her. 3 weeks into Dale's impossible schedule, Rebecca was running on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. She'd successfully completed every assignment despite weather conditions that had grounded other flights and mechanical issues that would have defeated less experienced pilots. Her success, however, only seemed to make Dale more determined to break her. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Rebecca arrived to find her assigned aircraft grounded for maintenance issues that should have been caught during the previous day's inspection. The delay meant she couldn't make her scheduled delivery to an offshore oil platform, a route that had a narrow weather window and no possibility for rescheduling. "Martinez." Dale's voice cut across the hangar like a whip crack. "My office. Now." Rebecca found Dale behind his desk with a stack of paperwork and an expression of barely contained anger. Standing beside him was someone she didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit who radiated corporate authority. "This is Robert Hayes from our insurance company," Dale said without preamble. "He's here because of your flight patterns and fuel consumption reports." Hayes stepped forward with a clipboard and a cold smile. "Ms. Martinez, we've been reviewing your recent flights, and there are some concerning patterns. Your fuel usage consistently exceeds projections. Your flight times are often longer than estimated, and you've requested maintenance checks more frequently than other pilots." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. Someone had been systematically building a case against her, cherry-picking data to make her look incompetent or reckless. Every deviation from projections has been documented and justified by weather conditions or safety requirements. "That's what everyone says when they're trying to cover up poor performance," Dale interjected. "The fact is, you've become a liability to this company." Hayes consulted his clipboard. "There's also the matter of your interactions with other employees. Several people have reported that you've been critical of company policies and management decisions." Rebecca realized she was being set up. Dale had been documenting their conversations and presenting them to the insurance investigator as evidence of insubordination or unprofessional behavior. Worse, he'd apparently convinced some of her colleagues to provide statements that could be interpreted as supporting his narrative. "I've never been critical of company policies," Rebecca said carefully. I've raised legitimate safety concerns and asked for clarification on procedures. Questioning management decisions is a form of criticism, Hayes replied smoothly. And given your military background, we're concerned that you may have difficulty adapting to civilian oversight. There it was, the underlying assumption that Rebecca's military service made her unfit for civilian employment. Dale had found the perfect weapon to use against her, a stereotype that painted her as rigid, aggressive, and unable to function in a normal workplace. I've adapted perfectly well, Rebecca said, fighting to keep her voice level. My flight record speaks for itself. Your flight record shows someone who takes unnecessary risks and disregards company guidelines, Dale countered. Yesterday's maintenance issue is a perfect example. Any competent pilot would have caught those problems during their pre-flight inspection. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. The maintenance issues had been internal engine problems that couldn't possibly have been detected during a standard pre-flight check. Dale was either lying or fundamentally ignorant about aircraft operations. The engine problems weren't detectable during pre-flight, she said. The maintenance chief can confirm that. The maintenance chief reports to me, Dale replied with a cold smile. And he agrees that a more thorough inspection would have identified potential issues. Rebecca realized the full scope of what was happening. Dale hadn't just been building a case against her. He'd been systematically undermining her support network. The maintenance chief, who had always been professional and fair, had apparently been pressured into supporting Dale's narrative. I want to see the maintenance report, Rebecca said. That's confidential company information, Hayes replied. But I can tell you that it raises serious questions about your attention to detail and commitment to safety protocols. The irony was staggering. Rebecca, who had spent a decade flying combat missions without a single safety violation, was being accused of reckless behavior by people who had never faced real danger or made life-or-death decisions under pressure. This is harassment, she said finally. You're using my military background to justify unreasonable treatment and creating a hostile work environment. Dale's smile widened. See what I mean? Instead of taking responsibility for her performance issues, she immediately plays the victim card. This is exactly the kind of attitude problem we've been dealing with. Hayes nodded as if Rebecca's reasonable response to unreasonable treatment somehow confirmed their preconceptions. Ms. Martinez, we're going to recommend some changes to your employment status. Effective immediately, you'll be placed on probationary status with reduced flying privileges. What does that mean, exactly? It means you'll be limited to local cargo runs under direct supervision, Dale explained with obvious satisfaction. No more mountain routes, no more challenging weather conditions, no more opportunities to exceed fuel projections or question company procedures. Rebecca understood the implications immediately. Dale was effectively demoting her to trainee status, stripping away the challenging assignments that had made her job tolerable and replacing them with mundane flights that any pilot fresh out of flight school could handle. And if I refuse to accept these conditions, then we'll have to consider whether you're a good fit for this company, Hayes replied. Henderson Logistics values team players, not prima donnas who think military service entitles them to special treatment. Rebecca looked between Dale and Hayes, seeing the trap they'd constructed with careful planning and malicious intent. They'd used her competence against her, turning her reliability and skill into evidence of arrogance and insubordination. They'd isolated her from potential allies and positioned themselves as reasonable managers dealing with a difficult employee. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I'll accept the probationary status, Rebecca said quietly. But I want everything documented in writing, including the specific performance issues you've identified and the metrics you'll use to evaluate my improvement. Dale's expression flickered with uncertainty. He'd expected her to either quit in anger, or argue with the decision. Her calm acceptance of unreasonable terms while demanding accountability was not what he planned for. That's not necessary, he stammered. We can handle this informally. I insist, Rebecca replied. If my performance has been deficient, I want clear guidelines on how to improve. I want regular evaluations so we can track my progress. Objectively, Hayes frowned, clearly recognizing that Rebecca was turning their weapon against them. If they put their accusations in writing, they'd be creating a paper trail that could be used against them later. If they refused to provide written documentation, they'd be admitting that their concerns weren't based on legitimate performance issues. We'll prepare something for you, Hayes said reluctantly as Rebecca left the office. She felt something she hadn't experienced since her military days. The cold clarity that came with being under attack by a determined enemy. Dale Henderson and his corporate allies had declared war on her, using her service record as ammunition and her integrity as a target. But they'd forgotten something important about military training. It didn't just teach you how to follow orders and handle dangerous situations. It also taught you how to fight back when the mission required it. Rebecca walked to her car with her head held high, already planning her counterattack. She had 3 weeks of documentation, witness statements from mechanics who'd seen Dale's harassment, and now a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior that violated several federal employment laws. Dale Henderson wanted to play hardball with a former combat pilot? He was about to learn why that was a very bad idea. As she drove home, Rebecca's phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Documentation is good. Evidence is better. Check your email. When she arrived at her apartment, Rebecca found a detailed email from an anonymous account containing copies of internal company memos, insurance communications, and recorded phone conversations that revealed the full scope of Dale's campaign against her. Someone inside Henderson Logistics was feeding her intelligence, and that someone had access to information that could bring down Dale's entire operation. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca smiled. Dale had chosen the wrong target, and now he was about to discover what happened when you backed a warrior into a corner. The real fight was just beginning. Rebecca spent her weekend studying the anonymous intelligence like she'd once analyzed enemy positions before a crucial mission. The evidence was damning. Recorded conversations where Dale discussed getting rid of the military bitch, insurance. Documents that had been deliberately falsified to inflate her fuel consumption numbers. And email threads revealing a systematic campaign to pressure her colleagues into providing negative statements about her performance. Most revealing was a recorded phone call between Dale and someone identified only as Uncle Robert, clearly the Robert Hayes who had posed as an insurance investigator. The conversation made it clear that Hayes wasn't representing the actual insurance company, but was instead a family friend helping Dale manufacture a case for termination. Monday morning arrived with unusual weather, clear skies and perfect flying. Conditions that made Dale's previous complaints about her route choices look even more ridiculous. Rebecca arrived early and found Tom Bradley already in the operations center, nursing a cup of coffee and looking troubled. Rebecca, I need to tell you something, he said quietly. Dale approached me last week, asking questions about your flying habits and your interactions with other pilots. What kind of questions? Leading questions. Things like, have you ever noticed Martinez being reckless or taking unnecessary risks? And do you think her military attitude creates problems for the team? He was fishing for negative comments he could use against you. Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that you're the most professional pilot I've ever worked with, and that this company is lucky to have you. But I got the impression he wasn't interested in hearing positive feedback. Before Rebecca could respond, Linda Walsh entered the operations center with an expression of barely controlled anger. She walked directly to Rebecca and spoke in a low, urgent voice. They got to Rick Martinez in maintenance. Dale threatened his job if he didn't sign a statement saying, "Your pre-flight inspections were inadequate." Rick's got 3 kids and a mortgage, so he caved. But he wanted you to know that he hates himself for it. Rebecca felt a cold anger building in her chest. Dale wasn't just attacking her professionally. He was threatening innocent people to manufacture evidence. Rick Martinez was a good mechanic with 20 years of experience, and Dale had forced him to compromise his integrity to protect his family. "There's something else," Linda continued. "I overheard Dale talking to Johnson about taking over some of your routes permanently. He's been telling people that you're going to be terminated soon and that other pilots should be prepared to absorb your workload." Rebecca realized Dale's strategy was more sophisticated than she'd initially understood. He wasn't just trying to fire her. He was systematically preparing the company for her departure while building a narrative that would justify his actions. To anyone who questioned them later, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check the supply closet in Building B. Look behind the cleaning supplies." 30 minutes. Building B was the maintenance hangar where aircraft parts and equipment were stored. Rebecca waited until Dale was occupied with a phone call in his office, then walked casually across the tarmac as if heading to inspect one of her assigned aircraft. The supply closet was located at the back of the hangar, hidden behind rows of aircraft parts and tools. Rebecca found the cleaning supplies and discovered a manila envelope taped to the back of a shelf. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Everything you need is here. The real insurance investigator arrives Thursday. Dale doesn't know. Use it wisely. A friend in the shadows." Rebecca pocketed the USB drive and returned to the operations center, her mind racing with possibilities. Someone with inside access to company records was actively helping her build a case against Dale, and they apparently had advanced knowledge of legitimate insurance investigations. The morning flights went smoothly, but Rebecca noticed Dale watching her every move with the intensity of a predator stalking wounded prey. During her lunch break, she drove to a nearby internet cafe and accessed the USB drive on a secure computer. What she found exceeded her wildest expectations. The drive contained complete email archives from Dale's account, including communications with family members about his plans to clean house and eliminate employees he viewed as threats. There were financial records showing irregularities in fuel purchasing and maintenance contracts, suggesting Dale was involved in activities that went far beyond simple harassment. Most importantly, there were communications with the real insurance company showing that they had never authorized an investigation of Rebecca's performance. Dale had been using a family connection to impersonate an insurance representative, which was likely a federal crime involving fraud and identity theft. Rebecca printed selected documents and returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. She now had enough evidence to destroy Dale professionally and possibly send him to prison. But timing would be crucial. She needed to wait for the right moment to strike, when maximum damage could be inflicted with minimum risk to herself and her allies. That afternoon, Dale assigned her to a routine cargo run that should have been straightforward. But as Rebecca prepared for takeoff, she noticed several irregularities in the aircraft's maintenance log. Recent entries had been altered, and required inspections had been signed off without being completed. Rebecca realized Dale was setting her up for an accident. By assigning her an aircraft with compromised maintenance records, he could later claim that her negligence had caused any mechanical failures that occurred during flight. If she crashed and survived, she'd be blamed for poor pre-flight procedures. If she didn't survive, she'd become a cautionary tale about military pilots who couldn't adapt to civilian safety standards. Instead of confronting Dale directly, Rebecca quietly documented the maintenance irregularities and requested a different aircraft for her assignment. When the backup aircraft also showed signs of neglected maintenance, she made a difficult decision. She grounded herself, citing safety concerns. That made flight operations inadvisable. Dale appeared within minutes, his face flushed with anger and excitement. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Rebecca refusing a flight assignment that he could characterize as routine and safe. What's the problem, Martinez? Scared of a little turbulence? Neither aircraft meets minimum safety standards for flight operations, Rebecca replied calmly. I'm grounding both pending complete maintenance inspections. You don't have the authority to ground company aircraft, Dale snapped. That's a management decision. I have the authority and the responsibility to refuse an unsafe flight. It's called Pilot and Command Authority, and it's backed by federal aviation regulations. Dale's smile turned predatory. So you're refusing a direct order from management? Rebecca understood the trap, but she also understood something Dale didn't. She'd been gathering evidence of his misconduct for weeks, and she had allies he didn't know about. More importantly, she had 24 hours until the real insurance investigator arrived. I'm exercising my legal authority as pilot in command to ensure flight safety, she replied. If you have a problem with that decision, I suggest you consult with the company's legal department. As Dale stormed back to his office, Rebecca felt the familiar calm that came before a decisive battle. Tomorrow, when a real insurance investigator arrived to find a company where safety regulations were being ignored and employees were being systematically harassed, Dale Henderson was going to discover what happened when you declared war on someone trained to win. The counterattack was about to begin. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often preceded decisive battles. Rebecca arrived at Henderson Logistics to find an unfamiliar sedan parked in the visitor space and a woman in a professional suit examining aircraft maintenance records with Rick Martinez. The real insurance investigator had arrived, just as her anonymous source had predicted. Dale was nowhere to be seen, which struck Rebecca as odd until she spotted him through the operations center window, pacing frantically while speaking on his phone. His usual swagger had been replaced by obvious anxiety, and Rebecca realized he'd just discovered that an actual insurance investigation was underway. Ms. Martinez? The woman approached with credentials extended. I'm Janet Morrison from Consolidated Aviation Insurance. I'm conducting a routine review of safety protocols and pilot performance records. I understand you've raised some concerns about maintenance procedures. Rebecca felt a surge of satisfaction. Her anonymous ally had orchestrated this perfectly, ensuring that her safety complaints would be the first thing the real investigator encountered rather than Dale's fabricated performance issues. Yes, ma'am. I've documented several instances where required maintenance inspections were either skipped or falsified in aircraft logs. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Falsified? That's a serious allegation. Do you have documentation? Rebecca handed over copies of the maintenance records she'd been quietly collecting, showing clear patterns of shortcuts and safety violations. Morrison reviewed them with growing concern, occasionally asking Rick Martinez to confirm technical details. Dale finally emerged from his office, his face flushed and his usual confidence notably absent. Ms. Morrison, I wasn't expecting you today. If I'd known you were coming, I would have prepared a proper briefing on our safety procedures. Mr. Henderson, I'm here because your insurance rates have been flagged for review based on reported irregularities. I'm particularly interested in the pilot performance issues that were brought to our attention by someone claiming to represent our company. Rebecca watched Dale's face go pale as he realized the scope of his problem. Not only was he facing a legitimate investigation, but his previous impersonation of an insurance representative had been discovered. I think there might be some confusion. Dale stammered. We haven't had any performance issues that would require insurance intervention. Morrison consulted her tablet. According to our records, Someone identifying himself as Robert Hayes contacted our office claiming to represent us in an investigation of pilot Rebecca Martinez. When we explained that no such investigation was authorized, we became concerned about potential fraud. Rebecca watched Dale's composure crumble in real time. His usual arrogance evaporated as he realized that his elaborate scheme had not only failed, but had actually triggered the very investigation he'd been trying to fake. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office," Dale said weakly. "Actually, I'd prefer to continue this conversation here," Morrison replied firmly. "Ms. Martinez, you mentioned documentation of maintenance irregularities. I'd like to review those now." Rebecca produced the USB drive her anonymous source had provided, along with her own carefully documented evidence. As Morrison reviewed the files on her laptop, her expression grew increasingly grave. "Mr. Henderson, these records show systematic violations of FAA maintenance requirements, falsified inspection reports, and what appears to be deliberate endangerment of flight crews. This goes far beyond insurance concerns into potential criminal liability." Dale's face had gone ashen. "Those documents, where did you get those?" "Some of this information is confidential company data." "Are you questioning the authenticity of your own maintenance records?" Morrison asked pointedly. Rebecca stepped forward, sensing the moment had come to deliver her decisive blow. "Ms. Morrison, I believe you should also know that Mr. Henderson has been conducting a systematic campaign of workplace harassment using fraudulent insurance investigations and coerced employee statements." She handed Morrison printed copies of the email communications and recorded conversations from the USB drive. As the insurance investigator reviewed the evidence, her expression shifted from concern to outrage. "Mr. Henderson, these communications show you conspiring with someone impersonating our company to manufacture evidence against an employee. This constitutes insurance fraud, identity theft, and potentially several federal crimes." Dale looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. "You don't understand. Martinez has been undermining company morale and creating safety issues. I was trying to protect this business." "By falsifying maintenance records?" Morrison's voice was ice cold. "By threatening employees to give false statements? By impersonating insurance investigators?" Tom Bradley and Linda Walsh had appeared at the edge of the conversation, along with several mechanics and ground crew members. Word was spreading quickly that Dale's house of cards was finally collapsing. "Ms. Morrison," Rebecca said quietly, "there's one more thing you should know. Yesterday, Mr. Henderson assigned me to aircraft that had been deliberately sabotaged. When I grounded them for safety reasons, he attempted to characterize my decision as insubordination." Morrison turned to Rick Martinez. "Can you confirm the condition of those aircraft?" Rick looked nervously at Dale, then seemed to make a decision that had been weighing on him for weeks. "Yes, ma'am. Both aircraft had serious maintenance issues that made them unsafe for flight. Ms. Martinez probably saved lives by grounding them. And Mr. Henderson knew about these issues? He told me not to worry about the minor problems because Martinez could handle anything." Rick's voice was barely above a whisper. He said military pilots were trained to fly broken aircraft. Morrison closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "Mr. Henderson, I'm terminating this company's insurance coverage effective immediately pending a full federal investigation. I'm also reporting this matter to the FAA, the FBI, and the Department of Labor." Dale's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into a nearby chair. "You can't do this. My father built this company. These people depend on their jobs." "Your father built this company, but you've destroyed it," Morrison replied without sympathy. "Ms. Martinez, I'll need you to provide a full statement for our investigators. Based on what I've seen here, you've been the victim of serious criminal misconduct. As Morrison continued documenting the evidence, Rebecca felt a hand on her shoulder. Tom Bradley was standing beside her with a mixture of admiration and relief on his weathered face. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology. I knew what Dale was doing was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to stand up to him. You've done something none of the rest of us were brave enough to do." Linda Walsh nodded in agreement. "You've probably saved this company. Dale would have run it into the ground or gotten someone killed with his games." Rebecca looked around at her colleagues and realized something important had happened beyond Dale's downfall. The toxic atmosphere he'd created was already beginning to dissipate, replaced by the kind of mutual respect and professionalism she'd known in the military. Her phone buzzed with a final message from her anonymous source. "Well done, Valkyrie. Sometimes the best missions are the ones that save your own people. Your real challenge starts tomorrow." Rebecca frowned at the message. Dale was finished. The investigation would clear her name, and Henderson Logistics would likely survive under new management. What challenge could be greater than what she'd just overcome? She was about to discover that sometimes surviving workplace harassment was just preparation for something much more important. As Morrison finished her initial documentation and prepared to leave, she approached Rebecca with a business card. "Ms. Martinez, our investigation will probably take several months to complete. In the meantime, you should know that your handling of this situation has been exemplary. Have you ever considered working in aviation safety consulting?" Rebecca smiled politely, but didn't commit to anything. She'd spent years thinking her military career was behind her, but the events of the past few weeks had reminded her that some skills never became obsolete. Leadership, integrity, and the courage to do what was right, even when it was difficult. These were qualities that mattered in any environment. As the sun set over Henderson Logistics that evening, Rebecca realized that Dale Henderson had inadvertently given her something valuable, the knowledge that she was still the same person who had earned the call sign Valkyrie. She'd just been fighting a different kind of war. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Rebecca had a growing suspicion that her anonymous ally knew something about her future that she didn't yet understand. 1 week after Dale Henderson's spectacular downfall, Rebecca was enjoying the most peaceful morning she'd had in months. The interim manager brought in by Henderson Logistics Board of Directors had restored normal scheduling policies, and toxic atmosphere Dale had created was rapidly becoming a memory. She was conducting a routine pre-flight inspection when her personal phone rang. The number was blocked, but something about the timing made her answer despite her usual caution with unknown callers. "Rebecca Martinez?" The voice was gravelly, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable weight of military command. "Speaking. This is Captain Michael Torres, United States Army Special Operations. I believe you know who I am." Rebecca's breath caught. Captain Torres had been her commanding officer in the Raven Squadron, the man who had shaped her into the fiery pilot she'd become. She hadn't heard from him since her retirement ceremony 3 years ago. "Captain Torres, this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is. Congratulations on your recent victory, by the way. Word travels fast in our community when someone handles themselves with the kind of professionalism you've shown." Rebecca realized her anonymous source must have military connections. The precision and intelligence gathering that had brought down Dale Henderson bore all the hallmarks of a military operation. "Thank you, sir. Though I'm not sure what you mean about word traveling." Torres chuckled grimly. "Rebecca, you didn't think we stopped keeping track of our best people just because they retired, did you? Your situation at Henderson Logistics was brought to our attention by someone who thought you might need support. And did I? Apparently not. You handled it exactly the way I would have expected Valkyrie to handle it. But that's not why I'm calling." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. She recognized the tone in Torres' voice, the same one he'd used before assigning her to the most dangerous missions. "What do you need, Captain?" "It's what your country needs, Rebecca. We have a situation developing that requires someone with your specific skill set and security clearance. I can't discuss details over an unsecured line, but I need to know if you'd be willing to accept a temporary consulting contract." Rebecca's mind raced. She'd thought her military days were permanently behind her, but the events with Dale Henderson had reminded her how much she missed having a mission that mattered, objectives that went beyond corporate profit margins. "What kind of consulting?" "The kind that involves helicopters, hostile territory, and saving American lives. The kind of mission you were born for." Before Rebecca could respond, her work phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn cold. The message was from Henderson Logistics Emergency Dispatch System. "Mayday Offshore Platform 7 requires immediate medical evacuation. All military assets grounded due to severe weather. Civilian contractors only option." "Captain, I need to call you back. There's an emergency situation developing here." "Rebecca, wait. What kind of emergency?" She quickly explained the situation while reviewing weather reports on her tablet. The storm system moving through the Gulf region was massive, with winds gusting over 60 knots and visibility near zero. No sane pilot would attempt a flight in these conditions, but someone on that platform was dying and needed evacuation to a trauma center. "How far offshore?" Torres asked. 40 miles. "The platform's medical officer says they have a worker with internal bleeding from a fall. He needs surgery within 2 hours or he's not going to make it." Torres was silent for a long moment. "Rebecca, this is going to sound like an impossible coincidence, but the consulting job I was calling about involves a similar situation. A SEAL team is pinned down in hostile territory. Weather has grounded all military assets, and we need someone who can fly through conditions that would kill most pilots." Rebecca felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with accepting a mission others deemed impossible. "Where?" "I can't say over this line, but if you can successfully complete this civilian rescue, it would demonstrate exactly the capabilities we need for the military operation." Rebecca understood immediately. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a test. Someone in the military had arranged for her to face a challenge that would prove she still had the skills necessary for special operations work. "Captain, are you telling me this offshore emergency is connected to your consulting offer?" "I'm telling you that sometimes fate presents us with opportunities to prove we're still who we've always been. The choice is yours, Rebecca. You can wait for conditions to improve and hope that worker survives, or you can show everyone why they used to call you Valkyrie." Rebecca looked across the hangar at the Apache helicopter that Henderson Logistics used for their most challenging offshore operations. It was a civilian version of the same aircraft she'd flown in combat, modified for search and rescue rather than military operations. The machine was capable of handling the weather conditions, but it would require the kind of flying that existed at the very edge of human capability. "If I do this," she said slowly, "what happens next?" "If you succeed, you get offered a chance to save American soldiers who are counting on exactly the kind of miracle you're capable of delivering. If you fail ... I won't fail." "Oh." Torres' voice carried a note of pride she remembered from their best missions together. "No, you won't. You never did. Contact me when you return, Rebecca. We have work to do." As Rebecca ended the call, she realized her peaceful civilian life had just become something much more complicated. The rescue mission ahead of her was dangerous enough to end her career or her life. But beyond that lay the possibility of returning to the kind of work that had defined her identity for a decade. She walked to the Apache and began her pre-flight inspection, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just whether she could save a stranger's life, but whether she was ready to become Valkyrie again. The storm was waiting, and somewhere beyond it, American soldiers were counting on a legend they'd probably never heard of. Rebecca Martinez was about to remind the world why some people become legends in the first place. The offshore platform appeared and disappeared in the swirling chaos like a ghost ship riding the edge of the world. Rebecca had been flying for 90 minutes through conditions that would have terrified pilots with twice her experience, navigating by instinct and muscle memory when her instruments became unreliable in the electromagnetic storm. The Apache helicopter shuddered and bucked like a living thing as she approached Platform 7, fighting winds that seemed determined to drive her into the churning black water below. Rain hammered the windscreen with the intensity of machine gun fire, and lightning turned the world into a strobing nightmare of white light and absolute darkness. Through her headset, she could hear the platform's medical officer providing updates. On the injured worker. Valkyrie, this is Platform 7 medical. Patient is failing fast. Blood pressure dropping, pulse thready. We need to get him airborne in the next 10 minutes or we're going to lose him. Rebecca smiled grimly at the use of her old call sign. Someone had been monitoring military frequencies and had passed along her identity to the platform crew. Whether that was Captain Torres covering his bases or her mysterious ally continuing to pull strings, she didn't know and didn't care. Platform 7, Valkyrie inbound. Prepare for emergency landing in rough conditions. I need your landing pad cleared and your medical team ready for immediate loading. The platform's helipad was a circle of metal barely larger than her rotor disc, surrounded by drilling equipment and communication towers that would shred her aircraft if she miscalculated by even a few feet. In normal weather, it would be a challenging landing. In these conditions, it was nearly suicidal. Rebecca began her approach, fighting crosswinds that tried to push her into the superstructure while downdrafts attempted to slam her into the deck. She could see figures in orange survival suits huddled around a stretcher, waiting for her to create a miracle out of metal and determination. At 50 feet above the platform, a massive wind shear caught the Apache and tried to flip it inverted. Rebecca countered with movements so fast and precise, they seemed to happen before her conscious mind had time to process the threat. The helicopter stabilized just yards above the helipad, and she began the delicate process of touching down on a surface that was heaving up and down in the storm swells. The moment her skids made contact, the platform crew rushed forward with the injured worker. Rebecca could see through the rain-streaked windows that he was unconscious and pale as death. Every second counted now. Loading complete, came the voice through her headset. Patient secured, medical attendant aboard. You're clear for immediate departure. Rebecca pulled pitch and lifted off into the maelstrom, feeling the Apache's engine strain against winds that seemed determined to drive her back into the ocean. The flight to the mainland trauma center would take 45 minutes in these conditions. 45 minutes of flying through the worst weather she'd encountered since her combat days. But as she settled into the rhythm of constant correction and adjustment that kept them airborne, Rebecca felt something she'd been missing for 3 years. The absolute clarity that came with a mission where failure wasn't an option. This was what she'd been built for, what all her training and experience had prepared her to accomplish. 20 minutes into the flight, her navigation system failed completely, leaving her to navigate by dead reckoning and the occasional glimpse of coastline through the storm. The injured worker's blood pressure was crashing, and the medical attendant was working frantically to keep him stable. Valkyrie, this is Coast Guard Station Mobile. A new voice crackled through her radio. Be advised, we're tracking you on emergency frequency. Your flight path is taking you through a severe thunderstorm cell. Recommend immediate diversion to alternate landing site. Coast Guard, negative on diversion. Patient requires immediate trauma surgery. I'm continuing to primary destination. Valkyrie, Conditions at your destination are below minimums for helicopter operations. Multiple aircraft have diverted. Rebecca checked her fuel gauge and calculated her remaining flight time. She had enough fuel to reach the trauma center with a small reserve, but no margin for error or extended holding patterns. Coast Guard, I'm declaring emergency authority. Patient will not survive diversion to alternate site. Continuing approach to City General. As she spoke, Rebecca realized she was making the same kind of decision that had defined her military career, accepting personal risk to save lives, flying missions that others deemed impossible because the alternative was abandoning people who were counting on her. The trauma center appeared through the storm like a beacon of hope, its emergency helipad illuminated by powerful floodlights that cut through the rain and darkness. Rebecca could see ground crews waiting with equipment and vehicles, ready to receive her patient. The approach to the hospital's rooftop helipad was complicated by downdrafts from the surrounding buildings and turbulence created by the storm winds flowing around the urban landscape. Rebecca had to compensate for wind shear, building wake, and her own fatigue as she brought the Apache down through the last few hundred feet. She touched down with the gentleness of a feather despite the howling wind, and medical personnel immediately rushed to transfer the injured worker to their care. As they disappeared into the hospital with their patient, Rebecca sat in her cockpit feeling the familiar mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction that followed successful completion of an impossible mission. Her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Outstanding work, Valkyrie. You just saved that man's life. The voice belonged to Captain Torres, and Rebecca realized he'd been monitoring her progress throughout the flight. More than that, he'd probably been coordinating with the Coast Guard and hospital personnel to ensure she had all possible support. Thank you, Captain. Is this where you tell me I passed your test? Rebecca, that wasn't a test. That was a reminder of who you really are. The test comes next, and it's going to make tonight's flight look like a training exercise. Through her windscreen, Rebecca could see the storm beginning to move inland, its fury gradually diminishing as it exhausted itself against the coastline. But she knew that somewhere in hostile territory, American soldiers were waiting in conditions far worse than weather, counting on a pilot they'd never met to bring them home. When do we start? She asked. Wheels up in 6 hours. There's a briefing packet waiting for you at Henderson Logistics and transport arranged to get you to the staging area. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. This mission is classified at the highest levels, and if it goes wrong, officially you were never there. Rebecca smiled as she began shutting down the Apache systems. After 3 years of corporate politics and Dale Henderson's games, the prospect of a mission with clear objectives and honorable purpose felt like coming home. Understood, Captain. It's good to be back. As she walked across the hospital helipad toward the building, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a final message from her anonymous ally. Well done, Valkyrie. Tomorrow you remind the world what American heroes look like. Give them hell. Rebecca deleted the message and prepared to become a legend one more time. 18 hours later, Rebecca sat in the cockpit of a military Apache helicopter watching hostile territory scroll past below through night vision goggles. The landscape was a patchwork of snow-covered mountains and deep valleys, all of it crawling with enemy forces searching for the 5-man SEAL team she'd been sent to extract. The mission briefing had been everything she'd expected and worse. The SEAL team had been inserted 72 hours ago to gather intelligence on terrorist operations. But their exfiltration had gone catastrophically wrong when a blizzard grounded all military aircraft in the region. The team was pinned down in a valley with no escape routes, surrounded by hostile forces and running low on ammunition. Valkyrie, this is Raven Base. Captain Torres' voice crackled through her headset. SEAL team reports enemy contact increasing. They've got maybe 30 minutes before their position is overrun. Rebecca checked her navigation display and estimated 12 minutes to the target area. In the old days, that would have been cutting it close but manageable. Tonight, flying through a blizzard in mountainous terrain while avoiding enemy air defenses, 12 minutes felt like an eternity. Raven Base, Valkyrie inbound. What's the status on enemy air assets? 2 helicopters. Confirmed in your area, possibly more. They're hunting for the SEAL team and will definitely engage if they spot you. Rebecca smiled grimly. Enemy pilots were the least of her concerns. She'd built her reputation by outflying people who were trying to kill her, and tonight wouldn't be any different. The weather was everything the briefing had promised and worse. Snow reduced visibility to near zero, while winds gusted strong enough to slam her aircraft into the mountainsides if she lost concentration for even a moment. Ice was building up on her rotor blades, affecting lift and control response. Valkyrie. This is SEAL Team Alpha. A new voice broke through the static. We can hear rotors approaching from the north. Can't tell if it's you or hostiles. SEAL Alpha Valkyrie. I'm coming from the south. Anyone approaching from the north is not friendly. Can you mark your position? Negative, Valkyrie. We're taking heavy fire and can't risk exposing our location until you're directly overhead. Rebecca understood the tactical situation immediately. The SEAL team was trapped in a defensive position, probably behind rocks or in a depression that provided cover from ground fire, but would be impossible to spot from the air until she was close enough to draw enemy attention. Through her night vision system, she caught a glimpse of muzzle flashes in the valley ahead, the distinctive pattern of automatic weapons fire that marked active combat. Somewhere in that chaos, 5 American soldiers were fighting for their lives. SEAL Alpha, Valkyrie. I have visual on hostile fire in your area. Be advised, I'm going to suppress enemy positions and then extract you immediately. When I call for you, move fast. Rebecca armed her weapon systems and began her attack run. The Apache's cannon roared to life, sending streams of high explosive rounds into enemy positions with surgical precision. Secondary explosions erupted as her fire found ammunition stockpiles and equipment. The enemy response was immediate and intense. Tracer rounds reached up toward her like deadly fireworks, while shoulder-fired missiles left smoke trails across her flight path. Rebecca rolled and dove through the defensive fire, using the terrain and weather to mask her movements. SEAL Alpha, mark your position now. A green flare arced up from behind a rocky outcropping, providing Rebecca with the precise location she needed. She brought the Apache down in a steep descent that would have been impossible in normal weather, using the blizzard as concealment until she was directly over the SEAL team's position. The landing zone was impossibly small, a patch of level ground barely larger than her rotor disc, surrounded by boulders and with enemy forces less than 100 yards away. Rebecca touched down with rotor blades spinning just feet from the rocks, creating a whirlwind of snow and debris. 5 figures in white camouflage burst from concealment and sprinted toward her aircraft. She could see that one was being carried by his teammates, wounded but alive. They dove through her open cargo door as enemy fire intensified, bullets sparking off her armor and canopy. All aboard. Came the shout from her cargo bay. Go, go, go! Rebecca pulled pitch and lifted off into the storm, climbing rapidly while enemy fire pursued them into the darkness. She could hear the SEAL team leader talking to his wounded teammate, providing medical attention while she focused on getting them clear of the immediate threat. Valkyrie, this is SEAL Alpha Actual. The team leader's voice came through her intercom. I don't know who you are, but you just saved 5 American lives. Outstanding flying. Just doing my job, Rebecca replied, though she felt the familiar surge of pride that came with successful mission completion. The flight back to friendly territory took 2 hours through conditions that tested every skill she'd developed over her career. Enemy aircraft pursued them for the first 30 minutes before giving up the chase, unable to match her knowledge of the terrain and her ability to fly in weather that grounded lesser pilots dawed as they crossed into friendly airspace. Rebecca, finally, allowed herself to believe the mission would succeed. The wounded SEAL was stable, his teammates were safe, and she'd accomplished something that the entire military establishment had deemed impossible. Valkyrie, Raven Base, Captain Torres. Voice carried obvious relief and pride. Outstanding work. You've just reminded everyone why legends become legends. As Rebecca began her approach to the forward operating base where medical teams were waiting for the wounded SEAL, she realized something important had changed. For 3 years, she'd been Rebecca Martinez, civilian pilot, trying to forget who she'd once been. Tonight, she'd rediscovered that Valkyrie wasn't just a call sign or a military identity. It was who she really was. After landing and watching the SEAL team disappear into the medical facility, Rebecca sat in her cockpit as ground crews began post-flight inspections. Her aircraft had taken several hits from enemy fire, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. More importantly, she'd proven to herself and others that retirement from active duty didn't mean retirement from being a warrior. Captain Torres approached her aircraft with the expression she remembered from their best missions together. Pride mixed with the quiet satisfaction of objectives accomplished. "Rebecca, I have a proposition for you," he said as she climbed down from the cockpit. "The Pentagon is forming a new unit for special operations that require civilian cover and unconventional approaches. They need someone with your skills and your ability to operate independently." Rebecca looked around the base, seeing the purposeful activity of military personnel who understood that their work mattered, that they were part of something larger than themselves. After 3 years of corporate politics and meaningless cargo runs, the prospect of returning to meaningful service felt like coming home. What would it involve? Missions like tonight. Impossible extractions, emergency medical evacuations, operations that require someone who can fly through conditions that ground everyone else. You'd have civilian cover for plausible deniability, but military support when you need it. Rebecca thought about Dale Henderson and his petty power games, about the peaceful but ultimately empty life she'd been living at Henderson Logistics. Then she thought about the 5 SEAL team members who were alive tonight because she'd remembered who she really was. "When do I start?" Torres smiled. "You already have. Welcome back to the war, Valkyrie." As Rebecca walked toward the debriefing room, her phone buzzed with a final message from her anonymous ally. "The legend returns. The world is a safer place when heroes remember who they are. Until next time, stay dangerous." Rebecca deleted the message and prepared to embrace the next chapter of her story. She'd spent 3 years learning that you could take the warrior out of the war, but you couldn't take the war out of the warrior. Some people were born to be legends. Others had legend thrust upon them by circumstances and necessity. But the rarest ones chose to become legends by accepting that their gifts came with responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. Rebecca Martinez had made her choice. Valkyrie was back, and somewhere in the world, people who needed impossible rescues were going to sleep a little safer, knowing that when conventional help failed, there was still someone willing to fly into the storm. The quiet civilian pilot was gone. The legend had returned, and this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.